Welcome to another philosophical conversation. My name's Cadell Last, and I'm here today with two friends of the channel, OG Rose, Daniel L. Garner, and Michelle Garner. For anyone who's followed the channel, these two will need no extended introduction, but of course, you can find their work as well as their books on Amazon, Belonging Again, Conflict of Mind, as well as the book that we're going to be discussing today, Under the Wing, and also the book that we'll be trying to build context for in the portal this May with a thought lab organized and specifically dedicated to Under the Wing, and a month with the Stygian Society, which is dedicated to art, literature, and philosophy in general. So welcome to the channel, Daniel and Michelle, and maybe just to start, let's get some background on how Under the Wing was born.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having us, Cadell. It's an honor to be here. We always enjoy and are delighted to be with you and speak with you. And yeah, I mean, Under the Wing is has had a long gestation. I'll say that much. These stories have been over many, many years, have been worked on. And, sometimes the genesis of a story will come many years ago and the work will be done then, and you'll revisit and revisit and revisit the stories. So it's been kind of a collection of over a larger span of time, I think, that I would, in many respects.
Yeah, I guess staying up from midnight to 5 in the morning to write Heroes in one burst. The first story was 2011. I think running to a diner between lunch breaks at the wholesale to do the sections of Under the Wing. I remember learning about that story of the solo spacecraft photograph that inspired the white man. So each one of the stories has a
Has its
genesis,
own story.
has its own story and a genesis,
Yeah.
and it came out of many conversations. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, so I guess OG Rose 2011-ish. When from there, and Michelle and I remember sitting in the back of Unoya
Yeah.
working on the stories.
Yeah, because that's kind of the genesis of OG Rose is fiction, really.
Yeah.
That's what we started with, and that's what we've always kind of worked tag team together on. And so that's it's kind of it's funny, and it's really it was exciting for me and for us to sort of bring that forth to the public and like to the spheres and spaces we know, and especially in the liminal web, because um, it's yeah, it's just a big part of why we are OG Rose. Like
Yeah.
why that even started, and that was the pen name that we created together at the back of this creative community center we lived
Help
at.
run. Yeah.
Yeah, helped run. Yeah,
Yeah.
called Unoya. So we were in the back at the back porch. I can still remember it. Just sitting around being like, should we do this letter, this name, whatever. And so we finally landed on OG Rose. We didn't know the significance of original gangster at the time,
Yeah. Yeah. Here we are, though.
but here we are. Yeah.
Yeah, Michelle's actually a very, very, very good someone to work stories off, and editor and conversation, and many, many and also too all the conversations we had, like your work on
Mhm.
Flashlight, on
Yeah.
different things. I think also, just as also a note, there's also something to be said. Fiction can be, what are the situations in the human condition that can be found in fiction that have not been thought?
Mhm.
There's these things like, what is philosophy going to philosophize about?
Mhm.
And often I think if you say, I want to do philosophy, then sometimes you can pour in from the top, or
Yeah.
maybe fit in into your own idea of how am I going to make the world. But if instead, when you're doing fiction, you find these situations of, well, how does Mary Rose end up in this situation?
Yeah.
What must the human condition be like so that this is possible? And this constitutes a good
Yeah.
work of literary fiction. And from the possibility of these characters ending up in these situations, then can arise philosophical reflection on their possibilities. So for us
Mhm.
too, fiction and the possibilities of the kind of stories that could be told in fiction, if they're done, in a way where you're trying to, I guess, get to the core of things,
Mhm. Mhm.
beg certain philosophical reflections on how this could happen to characters. So then,
Mhm.
and so then you do the philosophy that then
Yeah.
generates new stories, and then new stories beg how is
Yeah.
what must the world be like for this kind of story to exist and for characters to end up in these situations, and you get this kind of back and forth.
Yeah.
Well, it's, I think, super important to know about the context in which this book was birthed was also the context in which your couple was birthed. And I think
Yeah.
that, what's really interesting here in regards to the link with fiction and your guys' relationship is that, of course, you guys have the slogan, the true is not the rational. And the slogan that I want to sort of put into some sort of dialogue or conversation with that is the idea of Lacan, that the truth has the structure of a fiction. And this idea that the truth has the structure of a fiction is a really interesting one, right? Because usually it's a kind of counterintuitive or paradoxical notion. Because usually when we think about the true, we think about facts, or we think about reality, and we don't think about fiction specifically. So yeah, I think that that's an important angle to bring into this, and also appreciating sort of the way you're articulating the relationship between philosophy and fiction, which probably gets overlooked. And I think that's something that I'm most excited about going into our month in the portal is getting a better handle on what is the relationship between philosophy and fiction. And you guys have sort of, you weave it into your entire writing process. So yeah, I'd love to know a little bit more about how you understand the relationship between those two.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Cadell. And I think, well, I'll just speak about it from a personal perspective of my own relationship with literature and fiction, because I studied literature. That was like one of my majors, and Spanish literature. And so um, I I think that for me, it was always there was something that was always more compelling about getting to the essence, or the kind of the concepts behind the things that were happening in the story, right, or in the play. And I always felt as though it was interesting because it kind of speaks to what Daniel will talk about with like the art of the indirectness, right? Where you sometimes get at things more directly by being indirect, like this indirect, say you're reading a play by Chekhov or something like that, and you see the interactions of the characters, and you say, oh, there's something wildly informative about this, and about our human condition, and about the way that we work as human beings, that plays out through the interactions, and through the way that the characters speak to each other, or the way they don't speak to each other, the way they gesticulate toward each other. And I think that for me, yeah, it always made it more interesting, honestly. Like, and I think sometimes I did feel a little bit of a that I felt as though at that it wasn't always central to the way that literature is studied sometimes. It's a little bit more like, what's the moral of the story, or what's like, what are the certain motifs, and those things are all hugely important. But if you start asking questions about like, well, what does this say about life itself, or how does this relate to our actual relationships and things like that, it always kind of felt like in the discussions of my literature college classes, it would kind of like start to get crickets, or like people would, I think people were interested, but sometimes the TA may not have known how to engage with that. And but people afterwards would be like, yeah, that's interesting, I'm thinking of, like, we end up having a discussion afterwards about it. And so yeah, for me, there's sort of a you can write a nice story, and that's lovely. And there's something beautiful about that. But when the story can push you like to like, it should, to me, it's like when it can make you feel uncomfortable, but in a good way, like, that's so important. But you have to kind of open up yourself for that experience. And I can say that when I initially read Daniel, like the work that Daniel was writing, there was kind of a like, I want to know now. Like, I would read the work and I'd be like, I don't get this. It's so obtuse. It's like there's something I don't understand. And I would demand he give me an answer, and this was part of me editing, like, because I would be, basically sitting next to him being like, we got to sit next to each other and edit this stuff. And that didn't work because, it's too much of like, let's both look at, it's too many cooks in the kitchen. Okay. But what we figured out was a better system where you could send it to me. I could reflect on it and look at it and think through it and write my edits. I could articulate my questions, and I could give it back to him. And then he would look at it and he would have his own process with it. And we go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until you really get to the place where you can sit next to each other and start talking about sentences, and start talking about cadence, and start talking about word choice. So it's a very interesting like progression of our process of how we write together with fiction. That's really been very interesting, and it almost feels like developing a taste, like how winemakers can know, oh, there's a hint of dark chocolate and there's a hint of almond, and you're like, I don't know how they taste that. But you start to feel that with fiction, and with the way things sound, and what it needs to be, and how you have to kind of make the atmosphere. So that's that kind of got a little bit of an aside. But to the question of philosophy and literature's relationship, I do feel like it's supposed to push you. It's supposed to not just like for shock value or anything like that. You can use that as a tactic in your writing if you can do that in a creative way or a smart way. But when it's really kind of making you start to question yourself, like, why do I think the things I do? Why do I do the things I do? That's for me when it gets to where literature is has such a beautiful potential for letting us get philosophical with ourselves and with life itself. So I hope that kind of speaks to why I think of them as related.
All right. So basically, just based off what you were saying, Michelle, I mean, the things that were coming to my mind is how important it is possibly to train oneself in something like fiction or maybe even something like theology in order to work through the relationship between demand and drive. You know, you were saying in your reflections that when you were initially reading some of Daniel's work, you had, you know, the demand for an immediate answer. And I think I found that also a lot in philosophy, that a lot of people will encounter a big philosophy book and they're just like, can you just give me the chat GPT version of Heidegger? Can you just give me the chat GPT version of Hegel? I've even noticed some people presenting on Hegel and they just give a chat GPT version of Hegel. And you can always tell, right? But the thing that you're actually needing to process in probably philosophy, theology, and literature is actually the tarrying with not knowing and like
Yeah.
the frustration with, I don't understand what Heidegger is saying here. I don't understand what being in the world means. I don't know what Dasein means. I don't know. And that you're working through all of that, and that you might be unconsciously making many demands on the philosopher, like, just tell me, just give me an answer. But
Yeah.
it's kind of staying with that frustration, and I think that's what's, I think, maturing oneself into what I would call the drive. And then the other thing that I wanted to note was just how difficult it is to write with two people. I don't know how many people are aware of how difficult that is and how intimate that is. And it
Yeah.
is kind of like, I want to give the sexual metaphor, like it's almost that intimate, like in
Yeah.
terms of, you know, it's another level than a conversation, right? Because like I wrote a
Mhm.
trialogue, but that wasn't writing together. We were having a conversation together, and then I was translating those conversations into a book. But to
Yeah.
write, to share the same letter is a really intimate one. And so that's also interesting to hear about. There was a process of learning how to do that and
Yeah.
encountering the frustrations of having, quote unquote, too many cooks in the kitchen,
Yeah.
and learning how to work through those emotions. And you know, I often like wonder, like, how did Deleuze and Guattari do it? Like, you know, or I sometimes wonder, like, you know, do you have to be like completely psychotic to merge your words together? Like, especially if you're not in an intimate relationship. I think in your guys' context, it's my thoughts are a lot different, because I think writing together is very much like a marriage. Writing together is very much like an intimate partner relationship. So it makes sense that that would be a context in where building in that way was possible. So those are some ideas just to throw it at you guys.
Yeah, definitely. Two things came to mind really quick. Like I think you really hit the nail on the head with showing the parallel between philosophy and fiction is like tearing with the negativity. Just literally just tearing with negativity through not always being sure. And I honestly, had I just taken a little bit of time, which, I have developed with time, is to reread, right? Reread things. And I think the way that fiction is presented today is almost like a chick flick or something, right? Like you read it, you get it, you like it, you feel good, it's good. But I think that if it when it's actually, I think literature begs the reread, and so does philosophy. It's the repetition of work, returning to it and returning to it and returning to it, and then you start being like, oh my gosh, I get it now. You're like, whoa, and it's a reward. That's a rewarding process, but it's not easy and it's not quick. And so it's anyways, I think those two things are what are similar. And then also really quick on the process and that intimacy. Yeah, because I think there's a lot of vulnerability with doing that close of work on writing, because you have to be willing to um disagree and work through, just work through difference, because you're like, I literally don't think that is the right sentence. I think this is the way it maybe should be said. But also holding an open hand to like, okay, but I recognize that may not be what you're going for exactly. So let's see what we can come up with reworking this, reworking it until we hear what it sounds like. And we both are like, yes, yes, that's it. And yeah, so it's definitely an interesting, it's definitely an interesting and intimate process, and requires having to communicate, like, yeah, just as it would be in like in the sexual relation of actually being able to talk through that, and not expect, and not having it be like, and not sort of just thinking of it as this sort of like, oh, it just magically happens. It doesn't. It really does require, like, the magic will happen, but it does require the communicating and the vulnerability, and the, having to say the thing that you're like, I don't know if I should say this, I don't know if I want to say this, and, not wanting to hurt somebody's feelings and all of that stuff. And then, yeah, just the confidence too of being able to be like, this is me, or this is what I've written, and this is what I'm thinking. And yeah, there's like this place of being able to be vulnerable and malleable, but confident in what you are presenting as well. So anyways, I just wanted to speak to that a little bit more too.
Well, I mean, I think we often discuss the importance of subjective destitution and working with it. There's something about that process of editing through the work, putting something out to someone you've really worked at, letting it be critiqued, that is kind of learning subjective destitution, actually. And there's something to be said about the humanities, the arts, philosophies being uniquely positioned to help the movement from desire to drive. And unfortunately, the humanities departments have not, in my opinion, taught themselves as that. They've taught themselves as kind of neat, nice things that are maintaining some sort of, historic culture, whatever, which for whatever degree of truth we may think that has, critically it is about a certain tearing, a certain wrestling. And if you don't have that at the heart of your thinking about the humanities, then they're going to die. The departments are going to die, because why? Why would you do this? And so these departments have died. They don't know what they're about, in my opinion. A few things. To Michelle's defense, the ornithologist who studied the stars, understanding it, is dependent upon noticing that an exclamation mark is italicized. So that's really screwed up. So that's not good.
That's the first short stories that we wrestled with together.
It's ridiculous. But there's also things too, like, so I think there's something about when people talk about community and all of these different things, like there is something about working, say, in fiction or the arts or philosophies and tearing with these great texts that are actually training for being able to do that, actually. And if you skip that kind of training, then it just blows up, because you're basically having to move yourself from quote unquote desire to drive. If you've not done that work, and you come into a community, the dynamics of desire will eat it alive. It will completely destroy it. There are other things, too, of where I think also working on something like fiction for a relationship can be very important, because you learn to indirectly talk about things that matter. You learn about the thought process of one another. You think about the things that they are thinking about and they create. And there's a certain intimacy there that's very powerful, but not so direct that it overwhelms. And also, what would the reason be at dinner that you would bring up some of your ideas about how the world works? What would the context be that would allow that? But fiction actually creates a certain reason to discuss some of the deepest things and how you tarry and work with them, but do it indirectly, which of course gets into where we talk all the time with Beatrice about the unveiling with the UN in parentheses, and how so much of humans not killing one another depends on learning this art of unveiling. Well, there's something about workshopping works of fiction or working on, Heidegger or text that actually is a certain training in the art of unveiling, that if humans don't know how to do, we overwhelm one another. Love becomes Lovecraft, and we're reduced to ash and different things. I think also there's something about where, like Michelle was saying, the rereading is very important for the tarrying. I think basically, likewise, developing subjective capacities is tied to a certain reliving, the ability to live again or to rethink or to restructure, not to repress, but to, occupy. Because I think often what happens when somebody gives a work of fiction, they repress, they hide it, because it's I don't want to show it to people because what if they attack it? What if they dislike it? You get angry. There's actually something about withdrawing creative works from the public eye that is kind of like repression, keeping out of speech, keeping it out of dialogue, don't want people to see it, where forcing yourself to put it out there and then realize that story you rewrote 20 times is not good, and then you rewrite it 20 more and realize it's still not good, and then rewrite it 20 more and realize it's still not good, you come to realize that the only way to survive is to move to drive, because you're only going to re-edit Esperanza 60 times if it moves from desire to drive. And the other thing I'll say, but there's a lot to say on this very important idea of truth is structured like a fiction. But just for now, I'll say the other things that end up happening is like, in the story Esperanza, if I'm just researching how the ballerina moves should link together, it makes a whole lot of mistakes. When Michelle's in the bedroom reading it and actually doing the dance and going, no, these moves won't go together, you can't do that. There are different modes of thinking that when you want to bring a work of fiction together, you really can't make it realize everything you wanted to realize unless you have these different ways of thinking brought together that learn to work together. Yeah. Usually fiction is going to end up too far on the side of description and character development for the pleasure of the words, or too far on the side of philosophy, where you actually sacrifice the story for philosophical ideas, right? And it's as the great William Wilson said, it's poured in from the top. You can't allow the ideas of your fiction to be poured in from the top. Well, no one intends to do that, but it's very easy to do. How do you avoid doing that? Well, you may not even have the thought capacity to realize that you're doing that, right? But when you bring it into speech, when you bring your thought process, you can see things about yourself that you didn't know you weren't seeing, which makes you wake up. It's like when Mary Rose is climbing the riverbank. Michelle's like, that word doesn't mean that. What do you mean it doesn't mean that? Oh, she wouldn't say like, oh, I guess the way she falls back would actually have her land on her side. That doesn't make sense. You never saw that. And there's something also, and then I'll close, like there's something kind of merciless about fiction. Yeah. Like it has to kind of be perfect, honestly. Like that doesn't mean it's going to be something everybody loves necessarily, but you can't have a character appear on the other side of the field suddenly, or fall in one way and suddenly in the next sentence they're just on their stomach when they fell on their back, right? Like if you miss details like that, it kind of ruins what James Wood called the trance of believability, where you're just taken in the story, you kind of forget you're reading, you lose the trance of believability. So you have to catch everything. It's a really awful thing, because you can work on a story for 20 years and just mess up on a small little detail and, this sucks, whole thing's bad, right? But realizing those blind spots, because I think basically relationships are very similar. You could have you could have years and years of great time, and then you say one bad thing, or you make one mistake, and the reel can come crashing in to destroy it all, right? Like, it's really high stakes, but there's something about fiction and I'd say art in general that has a similar reality to it. Like, you really, really have to be very, very aware of everything. Oh, but also not write in a way that's scared of encountering the real or scared of making mistakes. You also have to bring the difficulty more into the focus, all while realizing that single mistakes can undermine the entire story. So there's something about fiction that has this training of subjectivity that I think is extremely important. It's been extremely important for our relationship. There's no doubt at all. And it becomes a way to sort of encounter these truths of what it is to be human without doing it too directly, but also not too undirectly that you never develop. You do it in that right way.
I just want to say something really quick. It's funny though, because as we talk about it, like, and we know it, we know what it's like to contemplate if one word is going to mess up the story, because it's things that we consider like and weigh a lot when we're doing like our editing process. But it's kind of it's sort of, it speaks to sometimes some of the things that I hear when we have these philosophical conversations about doing things that don't make sense to other people, like that could kind of be
obsessive.
Yeah. Or, it's sort of like that's unnecessary, and I think a lot of people who give any of their time and their devotion to studying things that aren't for, that aren't doing it for a job, that aren't doing it for a class, like a degree. It's hard to make sense of why it matters to do those things to other people, but it does matter. And I guess what I want to say is that it feels similar with this identification of this, a lot rides on a word, a lot rides on it being right and getting it right. Because some people are like, they can't, like, it's like a winemaker saying that. Get back to the winemaker example. It's like a winemaker saying, oh, no, this like one little thing that would mess it all up. And somebody who just likes box wine, they're like, they don't care. They don't know. So it's like, it's funny because the stakes feel high, and they are. But it's high for those who may be able to get to the place of that type of discernment. And I'm not saying everybody needs to or wants to, and that's okay. But for those who want to, that's who you're kind of writing to that. You're writing to the potential of a reader to see, to be open to something that does matter on little on little things, if that makes any sense.
Well, as a very quick note, that's one of the reasons why, like you go, so why go from desire to drive? If going to drive is going to lead to this refined taste that are going to make you
Yeah,
be obsessive, why would you bother to do that?
exactly.
Well, because once you've experienced drive and the kind of quality of experience relation and experience of the world you do it, you see the good of it, but you
Exactly.
can see why people are like, well, I don't want to become an expert in wine so I can enjoy box wine, right? I don't want to
Exactly.
enjoy fine literature so I can enjoy, just whatever's on the TV, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
first off, I think basically the claim we make in Belonging Again, and I think we've talked about a lot, is that the stakes of the political, economic global pluralism situation is such that actually that kind of experience and kind of refinement is actually necessary now, to not be captured, to not end up crashing, giving in to anxiety for totalitarianism or different things like that. Like that sort of refined mode of discernment is actually required of the subject now, in all of these other fields. But then, of course, as well, I would just say developing that refinement becomes incredibly useful in
It
relationships.
does. It
Incredibly
does.
useful because telling the difference between subtle emotional shades, the different ways people
Yeah.
speak, that
Yeah.
translates really directly
Yes.
into
Yes.
relationships,
Yes.
marriage, friendship.
Yeah.
Like you go,
Yeah.
well, we don't need all that. Well, then you're basically also saying you don't need that for relationships.
Yeah.
And if you actually try to relate to people on a deep level, you find out that that doesn't work,
Yeah.
right?
Like,
Unless you just basically kick out anyone who's different from you. Oh, okay. That's the whole problem, right? But that's what ends up happening. It has
yeah. Yeah.
major practical consequences.
There's a lot there to pick up on. I just want to emphasize a few things. The first is a study that I read in, I remember reading in primatology, where they were studying the social interactions between chimpanzees, and basically one negative interaction, say like two chimpanzees that have been friends their entire life, and then one negative interaction where one chimp pushed the other chimp out of the tree, that would go on to structure all the rest of the interactions. So just to say that, like, your point about like you can have 99 positive interactions, but if you have one really negative interaction, that interaction will go on to structure all the rest of the interactions. And that is, I think, what is so terrifying about long-term relationships in general, is that it is always kind of on that tightrope, so to speak. And of course, you can make an anti-fragile relationship, right? But at the same time, there are always actions that could potentially destroy it. And so that potential is always there. And again, there's something terrifying about that, but there's something terrifying fundamentally about living truthfully. And maybe that's why we need fiction. So, I'm just thinking here about like one of my questions would be something like, how do we get at the relationship between fiction and facts, as the truth of a relationship? Because I think, this is true for a marriage, but I think it's also true for like parents and children, like where it's not always clear what the truth is. Let me give an example. So like when I was, say, in my late teens, early 20s, I would get frustrated by my mom wanting to take a family picture that just showed us very affiliative, very positive, when I knew behind the picture there was a mess. And I think, like, having years to reflect on that, I think that it's very difficult to know what the truth is there. Is the truth trying to hold the semblance of unity and positivity and showing the world that you guys are a happy family? Or is the truth the mess behind the scenes, where after the picture is taken, you and your brother are pulling each other's hair out and your sister wants to go into her room and doesn't want to talk to you? So these types of weird things I think we encounter. You can also think about that in the context of an intimate partner relationship, like, and sometimes it's not so clear, right? Like where sometimes the fiction could actually undermine the truth of the relationship, like if you're blatantly lying about cheating or something like that, where you're hiding facts about cheating, like that's an example where fiction is completely destroying the validity of the relationship in a deep, profound way. But then, at the other hand, there's a way in which fiction can actually be the core of a long-term relationship, where you don't want to share every single thought that just comes through your head just immediately, because it will overwhelm your partner, right? So what I'm trying to get at here is like a very weird relationship between fiction and truth that I think is unique to long-term relationships and familial dynamics. And well, I'm sure you guys can do something with that.
Yeah. Oh, that was so good. Yeah, it also made me think of one of our dear friends, Sam Greener Side of Sam, and she was in the Stygian collection as well. And so she has a story called Blue Raspberry, and it explores that very question of like, what do you tell children that about the harsh realities of the world, and is it right or wrong to sugarcoat or not? And I think, yeah, I think that's why it's almost like, for lack of a better analogy, I do think there is something that, fire is like fiction, or sorry, fiction is like fire, right? Where it's just, we need it to help illuminate things in our lives, in our world, but it also can burn everything down because you could be living a double life and, you're dealing with, addictions and gambling that bankrupt your family or something like that. So yeah, it's not something it's not something to speak lightly about, but that's why I think that's why we see the stakes in fiction, right? Like that's why we see the stakes in the actual technique and of the writing, because it relates to the fact that there are real stakes for what, for what fictions we inform our truths, right? And what truth informs our fiction. And so yeah, I think that's yeah, to me it's almost like I can really relate. I thought that was a, really phenomenal example that you shared about the family photo, and then, everybody kind of is just so like mad at each other and upset and just like hates it, and yet like hear everyone smile. And I think those dynamics in family, like it's definitely relatable too. Like everyone's fighting, and then you pull up to church, it's just like, what is going on? Like I don't. And as a child, you're just like sitting there, just like I don't know what to make of this, like can somebody just call out the elephant in the room? Like this is so obvious, And so I think that's why though, there's a way in which it's there's something to kind of see about that you just to be able to step back and witness it and just recognize that it happens, right? Like this just happens for us as humans, is one thing. It can make for some really good plays and some really interesting fiction, to be honest, because it sort of shows that, wow, we've got these sort of we sometimes don't mean to, but kind of inherently live out some irony. Like Daniel and I, that's a big thing for us, is like, irony is the fabric of reality, right? So it's this is what's happening. And I think in terms of figuring out the discernment of, when are facts informing fiction and fiction informing facts, to me, I think that's where, I don't know, there's in some ways, I wonder if there just has to be some overarching theme that then you can kind of use as a litmus test for what is going to be the right thing to sort of actually articulate here. It is like, what is the overall theme? Like, what is the essence of that? If the essence is the health of the relationship, then you're going to be using fiction to show somebody love and affection when maybe you're just really tired, but you're like, that would mean a lot. And sometimes it's fine to just, I'm tired, going to sleep or whatever, but to show that affection and care when it's like, you kind of sometimes have to just honestly, you have to make yourself do it. You have to kind of fictitiously get yourself doing the thing because it means a lot, right? So that's in the theme of it, reinvigorating that relationship and maintaining it, right? But if you're like the fiction of I'm literally lying and making something up, that is not for the theme of the that's not for the theme, which is to maintain and reinvigorate the relationship. So I don't know if that yeah, if that speaks to it, but that's what it comes to my mind. Yeah, what, Daniel?
I think that's very well put. So again, on this idea that truth is structured like a fiction, because I think that's a lot also what Michelle is pointing to. So that famous idea from Pascal about God's hiddenness, where he says if God was too hidden, then you wouldn't know he was there. But if he wasn't hidden enough, it would be a fact, and it wouldn't be a relationship. There wouldn't be love, and also following Dante, you'd be destroyed, right? So there's God's hiddenness, which is not for the sake of avoiding, but for bringing into. So the truth of fiction is that we require hiding to be brought into, but that very mechanism can then be used to avoid, right? Also, too, one of the reasons that the truth is structured like a fiction, and thus it is a certain concealing to bring in too, because you can't, it has to be the very act of you working into it is the very act of knowing it is truth versus just facts or information, right? Your very act of changing yourself to experience what the story is about or the relationship is also that of what makes you able to receive what is the truth of the family per se without being destroyed by that truth, right? Like you can come to see or say, oh, my, as Javier once said, oh, my dad's just a person, right? Versus going, my dad is a monster or something, right? Well, that requires actually the hiddenness that then you can work through to go, oh, they're human beings as well. And what is the nature of reality to be like where people who are just trying to be people can end up so monstrous even if they don't intend to be monstrous, and the very things that they think are going to make things better, make things worse? What in the world must the world be like? And this, to me, starts getting at the truth of fiction. The other things I would say, too, is that, there's this idea of, okay, guys, are y'all saying that the point of a story is to discover the meaning of it, right? This is... So there's Flannery O'Connor was very critical of symbol hunting. Let's find the symbols in the story and the secret encoded meaning, and then we'll get at what the story is about. And see, famously, someone asked her what was the symbolism of the hat that the misfit was wearing, and a good man is hard to find. And she was like, to be on his head. And she's like, it's a hat, it's not a symbol. And she was basically warning that symbol hunting or breaking down the fiction to get at the meaning underneath it actually was destroying fiction. Well, this sounds confusing, because then it would be like, well, how in the world do you bring philosophy and fiction together then? It's the philosophy of the story is the story itself. Walker Percy once said that a story is a meaning that can be told in no fewer words. It is a metaphor that requires the whole of the novel to do the pointing that it points, right? You can't reduce it to anything smaller than the whole. And what we can think about like that is that the truth is the fact that reality is structured like a fiction. And what is fiction? It is the unveiling. And how do people go about unveiling? Every human being is constantly negotiating the tension between unveiling, veiling, hiding not, and the very efforts of characters and people to do that lead them to dramatic situations in their life where they find themselves ending up somewhere that they didn't know they were going to end up. And now they have to either rise to its occasion so it's a commedia, or fail so that it is a tragedy. The very efforts of humans trying to mediate the relationships with one another out of good intention can lead them to hell, and efforts of people actually to be cruel to one another can provide opportunities for people to actually find that they have something going on that's deeper inside of them that can overcome that difficulty, right? So that is the truth. The truth is this very process of the negotiation of the unveiling that if you do too quickly, destroys people, and if you do too slowly, destroys people, right? Like on this idea of the truth of the family, there's the truth of actually when the family goes to church secretly, there's an elephant in the room that's not being spoke. So that's the truth. But there's also the truth of the fact that it is veiled at all. Like the very fact that humans engage in the hiding. Why do they do that? Why do they think they need to do that? How do they not see that as hypocrisy? What is the very truth of the act of fiction? What is the fiction in fiction? Like fiction is often about how humans make fiction. And that's how we survive, and how that's where we get along, and how do those efforts to create fiction actually work against us or actually lead to different situations. Like the truth of fiction is the fact that humans make fictions, that they actually are constantly negotiating the veiled and the unveiled, and how do they do it, and how do they not see it as blatantly hypocritical? How do they put on a different face when they go to work and a different face when they're at home and somehow not see that there's something problematic about it? Well, then, of course, very naturally, fiction leads into psychoanalysis and all of these questions of how people go together. There's more to be said, but I think these topics start getting at what good fiction is about is bringing to the foreground mechanisms that are in the background of actually structuring all of our lives. Like I was just speaking with Aspasy and Tim asked this wonderful question of voicecraft of how do you make the unconscious conscious? How do you bring what is unconscious into consciousness? And if you do that wrong, you destroy people. But if you never do that, people's unconscious basically controls them, right? Fiction is a mechanism of bringing what is in the background to the foreground, the unconscious to the conscious, but doing it in a way that the very fact it's fiction means people might be able to receive it. If it was biography, they'd be like, no, that's not true, because they want to disavow it, right? But the fiction actually is a means by which people can then talk about background slowly and indirectly in a way that it can be foregrounded, but not so quickly. Which then, I guess the last thing I'll say is Michelle and I also talk all the time about the importance of meta talks in relationships, the ability to talk about talking, the ability to
Yeah.
talk about the relationship, the ability, like both philosophy and fiction afford this. Because when you're able to talk about how do people end up getting into affairs, like how does that happen to people,
Mm-hmm.
and it's depersonalized because you're talking about the idea of it, what is the mechanisms that get people into those situations, or what gets people into gambling, you're able to talk about these things and reflect on them, rather in fiction to create a story or in philosophy to talk about it, which then makes you aware of how that happens to people so that you don't unintentionally end up in those things. And also you feel empathy for people that do end up in those things, and you don't feel so judgmental because you can see how the psyche structures those people. So the ability to have meta talks, to talk indirectly about things that matter, is invaluable for relationships, and you yourself not ending up in one of these ironies or situation like a character like Esperanza ends up, or Eve, or so on and so forth, that Under the Wing is about.
So, what I want to ask you both is something that will eventually connect our investigation of philosophy and fiction also to the work of Pavio and the Stygian Society and what they're bringing to the equation as well. So, I want to set this up by saying that in the portal we've been focused on metagelicalism, and metagelicalism, as far as I understand it, is, and as far as I'm reading it now, like talking to people who would be seen on the inside of metagelicalism, is kind of like evangelicalism coming to its limit and needing to include within itself orthodoxy and Catholicism, and like needing to sort of like feeling like the evangelical moment has either exhausted itself or emptied itself in some way and needs to connect in a deeper way with, let's say the deeper traditions of Catholicism and Orthodoxy. So the reason why I'm saying that is because in the work of someone like Jonathan Pajot, who I think is probably an archetype of metagelicalism, in the sense that he was raised evangelical but is now sort of identified as an Orthodox artist, is that he says that Christ, and the reason why we're going through a Christian moment in the larger culture is because Christ is a true story. So Christ is a true fiction. And I think that one of the things I've learned in talking to metagelicals is that they don't necessarily care about, let's say, the historical critical realism of like modernist, like literally, did it happen? Did Christ literally rise? They're not sort of focused on that. They're more focused on how does this story inform my existence? How can this story help me live, basically? And the reason why I'm sort of setting this up is because I want to talk about the way Pei is developing the idea of modern literature as Christian atheist. So one of the ideas I was having is that modernity in many ways tries to break free with the Christian story, I think, because modernity is wanting to tell itself new stories. Modernity is wanting to tell itself different stories. In other words, there's a qualitative domain of social life that opens up in modernity that is made possible by Christianity and can still be informed by Christianity, but is not necessarily completely covered by Christianity. And so I think that Pei's getting at this when he talks about how modern fiction is Christian atheist because God is not completely present, but at the same time, a completely atheistic worldview is also impossible. So on the one hand, God is not present. On the other hand, complete atheism is not possible. And so there's this tension that you see in modern fiction. And I want to know what you guys think about that, and also whether or not the fiction that you guys are writing is kind of operating in this tension of, the legacy of Christianity, the truth of Christianity as a story, as a fiction, but also the need to tell new stories, and how do we tell new stories?
That's a tremendous question. I think, first off, in the same way that Lacan was kind of like, we need to go back to Freud, there's a way in which one of the problems is that fiction is trying to say, fill the gap, fill the lack, the death of God, or something like that, but it doesn't go back to the tradition. And thus it becomes just kind of, people are not reading literature. They're not going back to Cervantes or Sophocles, et cetera, so forth. And that's not because I want to moralize and say they're the greats and we need to know them or different things like this sort of like, this is true art or something. No, you need to go back and know the traditional people that are quote unquote wrestling with God or wrestling with things that have great stakes. Literature that has ontological stakes, not just personal expression. Because for many of these people, it's like, Martha Nussbaum puts it in The Fragility of Goodness. Like, the truth of reality is such that you will eventually be brought to a place where you have to choose between things you care about. Serving the gods or serving your family, and Antigone, I believe, is the examples he uses, right? Like, that's the truth of reality. And if you don't read the conversation about the truth of reality where you're inevitably going to end up there, then whatever fiction you trying to fill the space is ultimately going to be very shallow and it won't be able to bear the weight. It's going to crack. And so that's a major problem. I think also too on ideas of, so the belief in Christianity is certainly a reality. And the ideas of Christianity are realities by which people live. And it is important that you show characters living those ideas. But the key for me often with literature is it has to stay in ambiguity. And ambiguity is not uncertainty. It's a certain doubleness, as William Epson says, right? Like, you have this idea where a character who's, say, trying to live like Christ, if it's there, simultaneously does not get confirmation that they are, or that it works, or that other people understand it, right? Like, you have to show the character making a quote-unquote absolute choice for something that they choose that believes them, which can lead them to terrible situations or ambiguous understandings of what they are in, right? If you don't tell fiction that makes true ambiguity, then whatever true story you are trying to get at is going to leave behind the condition by which the true story is related to. And so you can't do that. That's pouring in from the top. And you can do that two ways. You can make unambiguous that God is dead and doesn't exist, and you can do that by making unambiguous that God is alive and you don't need to worry about it. Both of those actually miss the tension of the human condition that must be looked at straight on if we're going to actually bear the weight of what it is to be human, to actually be in this world and to deal with what it is for ourselves. I think too, like, on the idea, like, from C.S. Lewis, I guess Tolkien told him, is like, yes, sure, there were many, myths where there was a God who was born of a virgin and died and then rose from the dead. But, the claim of Christianity is that this actually happened in history, right? That this was actually an event, which of course draws into question, what does it mean to say that you can separate the story from the historicity of it, right? Like, if it's just a story that's nice to live by, then what is sort of the grounding of it? Well, you would have to sort of show that actually it ends up showing up in the historical lives and true lives of people, even if they don't know about Christianity. That actually that story ends up how people live, even if they don't mean to, simply because of the truth of it. Which, I actually take that to be a bit of what Zizek is getting at on the idea that atheism has to go through Christianity. Because if you don't do that, you're actually going to end up in a big other and not even realize it, right? So you have to go through that subjective destitution. That has actually been, and that's been kind of important for us, is actually to show if you're going to talk about Christianity being the true story, then it has to show up in the stories of people who don't believe in Christianity, because otherwise it would only be contingent, right? And so how do you do that without breaking the rules, and going beyond that? And that gets into the art and refinement of, those are some opening thoughts, but Michelle.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there, and that was all really good from both of you, and that consideration and question is a great one, Cadell. Something I've been reflecting on Pei's presentation ever since Rosie Cross too, and I was thinking about kind of trying to get in touch with that concept myself. Like, how do I understand that to be the case for fiction and for literature? And I guess it made me think of just the phenomenology of how you read a book, right? Like, you read fiction and literature, and you believe that it's a real story and has stakes and it matters enough to come back to it and pick it back up again. But it's just fiction, right? And so to me, I'm like, maybe that's the dimension, right? Where Christianity is the belief part and atheism is it's just fiction, right? It's just fiction. Like, it does. So it's like, in a sense, it's like it exists and it doesn't exist. God exists and he doesn't exist. But there's a way in which, there's something about, I think that, so that's just something that it made me think of how, and I don't know if that would be a right way to interpret what Pei was talking about, but it was something that really was provocative. And this is what I came to conclude in terms of how we actually engage with books. How do we engage with fiction and literature? and how is that reflective of just the sort of the very basic understanding of Christianity and atheism. But I think that too with literature and what Daniel's talking about with poured in from the top, like I think I don't know, I do think it's kind of a interesting thing because often the concept of fiction and literature can also be very much reflect the theist position, right? It's like God is the author and we are the ones who receive that word and we live differently because of that word. And that word can maybe be thought of as like, actually the spirit, because the words always take our breath and always take our that the concept of the spirit being the breath of life itself. So but I'm thinking about the fact that today the explicit is so much more I want to say practiced in in the mainstream in terms of fiction. And so I think what can be challenging is to to kind of to be able to write stories like that Daniel was saying, which stories of people who don't even have any theistic position, showing some sort of relationship and dialectic. That really just the thought was about this idea that for a lot of mainstream Christianity, if you're not writing, books that like can clearly point to God and like that there's this Jesus story underneath it, then why are you doing it? You know what I mean? And I think that that's detrimental for culture making in general, for any, like, if you do have a theistic position and a Christian position. So it's like the concept of like heaven coming to earth or remaking the earth, and this sort of rebirth, that all of those kind of concepts and motifs that are there and ripe in Christianity, I think that they should be the very nature of literature itself, and can be without being Christian literature or Christian fiction, And I think that's the area where we're interested to explore. If I'm just
Well, no, I
if that
did
makes
not
sense.
to
Yeah.
we had it at Unoya with Christina and Bernard. One of the classes was Christian Artists Anonymous, and the idea was that we're not
Christian
Christian
Artist Anonymous.
Anonymous, and the idea was that we're not Christian. We're not Christian artists. We're artists who are Christian, which is a very important distinction
I love
because
that distinction.
because I really think that I do actually think that a lot of, say, Christians or people with maybe robust theological backgrounds could write really powerful fiction because they've been tearing with big questions. But it doesn't occur because they feel bad if they don't make propaganda, basically. They feel bad if they don't pour it in from the top. And that destroys everything. And it won't last because what lasts are like the works of the Four Quartets by Eliot, or I could go on, like fiction that is good fiction, that if you do fiction well and you're, say, a Christian, the Christianity will be in the fiction, not because you tried it, but because it will come out, because you will make it true. And this has been the truth that you have brought into yourself, and it will come out. I think also, just as a quick note, what you were saying about the idea of the author, I think it is extremely important that when you make fiction, the characters feel like they have nothing to do with you. Like, you don't go, oh, I'm the author who created these people. Like, we talk about Mary Rose all the time. We didn't make Mary Rose. You did, obviously. You wrote Mary Rose. You wrote Eve. But they actually come to exist as if you're dead. Like, you become a kind of dead god, if you will. Actually, you like push them beyond yourself.
Yeah.
And I find this extremely important. Because if you say, oh, yes, I know the truth of the motivations of Esperanza, I know the truth of, we know the particular ambiguities or plays or double meanings or all these different things. But when Esperanza dances, Esperanza is her own person.
Yeah, and she's doing it for her own reasons.
And the key for us to actually a successful story, which leads to it taking 14 years and madness, is precisely trying to get it to the place where it's passed through you. Where it doesn't feel as if it relates to the author anymore. And actually you start talking about them as if they don't, as if they're their own people. Like you orchestrate your own death of God, I almost want to say. Like you orchestrate you're writing fiction to orchestrate your own death as the author. You must write to die as the author for the thing you author. If you do not do this, it doesn't work. It's propaganda. So this is very important.
I just want to say that I've been thinking in the same line since Pei's presentation. So just the power of it is that I like this idea, and I want to connect this to something that was brought up at the beginning of our conversation, and maybe brings the conversation a little bit full circle, and then also might set us up very nicely for exploring the types of things that we'd like to go into deeper in the portal. So just this idea that there's a kind of, let's say, Trinitarian structure to fiction, in the sense of the author is kind of like God that needs to die to his work or her work, and that the child is the book, and or the book or the creative work that's being undertaken, perhaps any medium, doesn't matter. And then I want to say, like, the Holy Spirit is kind of like the readership or the audience or the community that forms around this work of fiction, or can form around a certain creative work. And I just want to say that that whole sequence is important to think together, because of what you guys were saying earlier about people who kind of obfuscate their releasing of the work to the world. I think if you don't release your work to the world, what you're doing is you're being this self-enclosed God. And I think the self-enclosed God that doesn't want to make mistakes, the self-enclosed God that doesn't want to die to him or herself, the self-enclosed God that is in some sense separate from the world, as opposed to releasing him or herself to the world. So I think that that's really important to note. And then the final thing I want to say, well, there's two more things I want to say just very quickly, is the first thing is that one of the things that surprised me in that process is realizing that a lot of the times, I think people are not as much interested in the actual work as they are in the person that made the work. Like they're more interested in, like, okay, reading someone's book is interesting that you're inspired by, but meeting the person that wrote the book that you're inspired by is kind of what people really want to get to. And then, I mean, I guess it's kind of a bit of a tangent, but I just wanted to say that there's something interesting that's coming to my mind inspired by the metagelical conversations, which is basically, the new atheists would always say, what's great about science is that it's true even if you don't believe in it. And I think what they're talking about there is like truth as an external reality. But it kind of sounds like what you're saying about, like the example you gave of the of the of Christianity as a true story, even if you don't believe in it. It's like it's kind of the same axiom applies in a different dimension. Like, what's great about Christianity is that it's true even if you don't believe in it, meaning something like the Trinitarian dialectic, something about the story of that process will happen to you even if you don't self-identify as a Christian. And I think that that's really important. Like, that's how I've come to sort of understand my own journey, is that even though I didn't self-identify as a Christian, something like the Trinitarian dialectic makes sense in light of my experience. And so anyway, that's sort of, that was a little bit off tangent, but maybe as like a final or a closing thoughts, I could get like each of you maybe just to sort of say what's coming to your mind inspired by this, and also what you're looking forward to in the portal.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, that was wonderful, Cadell. Thank you so much. And yeah, I think, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited because I think there's a really ripe overlap with fiction and philosophy, and I'm excited because sometimes I there it's doing the work and kind of going through the process of fiction and how and its ideas that, to me, I think make it so valuable, like where it can actually be something that you have to ruminate with, and you have to kind of regurgitate and sort of do that sometimes too in a communal process. Like, I remember Daniel saying, I think maybe about one of, maybe it was Faulkner's stories or books about, you read it and then you're like, I don't, it's not really, doesn't really, you can't really kind of access it. But then sometimes you have the opportunity to do that in a sort of have somebody who's much more knowledgeable, like a wonderful professor who maybe elucidates it, or somebody who kind of sheds a new light on it, and then you think, wow, this is like my favorite book now. And so I think there's something about the communal grappling, that not to find the author to tell you what it meant so you can now understand, right? But so that you have a deeper kind of relation to the book itself and how it relates to life itself, and how that actually can change your life, so that it does, again, make you feel I think it's important that books make us feel uncomfortable, whether they're philosophy books or fiction, not to sort of glorify or deify just being uncomfortable, but for the sake of it pushing us and changing us. And I think, to me, I remember reading a book. It was actually some like Jungian analysis book, like, I don't know, a year ago or something. And I remember being like, if I really took this seriously, I'd probably like change the way I'm doing certain things. Like I would actually face some of my fears, and I would actually, do things I know I probably should do. And then I was like, I guess I should do that. Maybe I should actually go on and do that. And then it was really, really, really transformative, and I think every book, that's really actually in this great conversation, this philosophical literary conversation of the fact fiction of life will do that. Will challenge you and will push you and change you. And that's, I think that's a marvelous opportunity right there. And so, yeah, these things are not, to me, for us, it's very clear how they're related, but I think it will be lovely to kind of really get a chance to make that more, I don't know, like I said, maybe more elucidated amongst the community. So, yeah.
Well, magnificent, and this has been wonderful, and we're looking forward to the month very much.
Yes.
So, once you understand that fiction is not just personal expression, that fiction is somehow true, then when you read literature, you must change your life, as the Wilka poem says, just like you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, there is something true about Caddy and the Compson family. There is something true about Bloom. There is something true. Okay. Well, if that's the case, then the world is different, right? And I have to respond to that or not, right? And so it demands something. And perhaps one of the reasons we like to think that fiction is simply personal expression or taste or opinion is simply to disavow the demands that it would put on us. And I think we've basically done that to the humanities in general. Like, if you understand that the humanities are not simply personal expression, taste, some guy wanting to be praised, but actually it's some sort of articulation of the case of what is so, the truth, well, then you would have to take it seriously and you would have to change your life, right? So there's a certain disavowal that occurs. I think once you get into fiction and do it, you come to see that it is not personal expression, that there is a truth to it. It is not, you don't just get to arbitrarily choose what the character does or what the sentence says. There is I dare say, logic. There is a reason it occurs, and that reason is not simply bound to your preference. It has something to do with how the world works, how people are. Your interpretation of it, yes, but it is participating in what is actual. And therefore, once you get that, you understand, fiction has ramifications. In the same way that once you do philosophy, you really get that this has ramifications. It really matters. And if you want to say, well, I don't want to worry about it, that's a risk. That's a bet. If you want to say you're going to you're probably going to end up in one of those unconscious dynamics we've been talking about. You're probably going to end up not knowing how to unveil in a manner that's good. You're probably going to end up making one of those mistakes in a personal relationship that tears the whole thing down. Because sometimes we talk about fiction and philosophy like a fire extinguisher. 99% of the time you don't need it. Yep. But that 1% of the time you do need it, really matters. Really friggin' matters. And so really taking this stuff seriously really matters. And not to say that from merely a fear-based, but it also matters in the way that it opens you up to drive and beauty and the depths of a relationship with human beings, a quality of experience that otherwise you wouldn't know are possible. Other things, there is this idea as well, like for us, it's very important, following Turner or different things, that if you're a Christian, when you go into fiction, you leave your Christianity behind. Because if Christianity is quote unquote true, then all truth is Christian truth, and therefore writing something truth will reflect Christianity, right? If you do not leave it behind, then it actually makes it less reliable whatever truth comes out, because it's poured in from the top, right? And what ultimately also ends up happening is if you end up like taking Christianity seriously, you just find, like you're saying, that you end up doing the fiction well, and it has overlaps with Christian ideas like the cross and crucifixion and resurrection and rejection and the Savior being, but you see these things coming up because of how the world is. And fiction, when you get into it and you're doing it and you know that it has to reflect how the world is, and you find patterns that emerge that of course could reflect your bias, that's the ambiguity necessary for actually developing as a subject. But when you see things emerge, then that says something. Right? And then once you understand that there's a truth to fiction, the fact that this appears in fiction, says something about what is true. The last thing I'll say is that on this idea, too, of people wanting more so to be writers than to write, It's very similar that people want to believe in God versus go through the cross, right? They rather believe in God than go through the subjective destitution of Christianity or something. They'd rather believe, like rather than going through it. So likewise, I think there's always a pleasure of being seen as a genius, a creator, a writer, or different things, but not actually the work. And what you're ultimately working for is to have the work be something that can be discussed as if you don't even exist. And I think there's an interesting gradient I'll just point to with philosophy and fiction, where I think philosophy, like at Philosophy Portal, is having a certain return, the revenge of philosophy, as you've put it, because people are bringing Hegel into their personal experience. It's not just about being a Hegel scholar. It's, oh, actually, we need to know Hegel to live. This isn't just about interest and I like Hegel versus other things. There's something where you have been convinced. You have been convinced that this is necessary. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe you're getting it off. Maybe there are better thinkers or whatever, but you're like, no, 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 this really has stakes, right? So you're bringing it into your personal life. And what becomes very interesting in that kind of discourse, you're talking about Hegel, but you're actually not talking about Hegel at the same time, right? This kind of doubleness, right? That's a movement in the death of God direction for the unleashing of the Holy Spirit, right? Because you're not saying you're going through the Father. You're not saying that Hegel doesn't matter. You're showing respect for that, but you're also bringing it into the Holy Spirit where you can communicate with people on their terms in light of Hegel, but not to prove how much of Hegel they know. I think fiction actually takes it to where you can talk about The Sound and the Fury without Faulkner entirely. Like there's a kind of level to that as well that's even kind of completing, I almost want to say, or taking further the sort of going through the master signifier, because you end up talking, when characters are truly alive, then you can easily talk about Alyosha, Ivan, and Dmitri without ever mentioning Dostoevsky. And then those characters become their own beings without the author at all. And you can actually forget the author entirely. So there's something about learning the practice of you yourself creating works that can be talked about without reference to you at all. That is part of your own death of God for the making of the Spirit. And it then affords communities that are orchestrated around Holy Spirit activity, because the thing comes to have a life of its own without the author. And actually, when you do something like that in philosophy, it comes alive. There's a certain leaving behind the author when fiction is done well, and when philosophy is done well, that is not a deconstruction and entirely disavow of the author. You honor the author because you know this is only possible because of them. But the gladness of the author, the gladness of Hegel, who have come from the fact that these people can now talk about these characters without reference to me. They can actually talk about this world as if I don't exist, which is exactly what I wanted, because the whole reason I made these things is for there to be a sort of world that people can occupy and be part of and think through themselves without reference to me. And I think that practice is part of the recovery of the humanities, the recovery of philosophy, the recovery of fiction. And if you do these things, and basically the last thing I'll say, you can't, I really do think, because of this relationship we're talking about, there's something about doing fiction well that requires philosophy, and something about doing philosophy that requires fiction, because you're learning how to talk about an author without getting too much into it, but you're also learning how not to talk about an author without getting too far away from authors. To make the point, a lot of fiction people are going to this level of talking about stories without reference to an author, which then actually makes them unable to do that, so they become obsessed with being the writer and being seen as a writer because they haven't gone through the philosophical process. But likewise, because people have not done the work of tearing with negativity, they just become, say, a scholar of Hegel, and Hegel is the master signifier, right? So there's this double relationship that I think is trained through both. But I'll stop with that, and I've really appreciated this.
Well, there's a lot of themes there that I'd love to pick up in the portal. I mean, and I think there's a lot of things there that I think reflect the truth of what we're doing, and the truth of the meaning of our work in a larger context, in a living context. So for everyone who's interested in getting involved, we are going to have basically a month-long process with OG Rose, with the Stygian Society, and that is going to be going into some of these themes we discussed today about philosophy, about literature. I'm going to open up the month with an introduction to real speculations. The second event is going to be on art, algorithm, and authenticity with the Stygian Society. We're going to have an event focused on Under the Wing with OG Rose. And then we're going to have a real talk about basically our relationship to story. So if you want to get involved, links will be in the description. You can get involved through OG Rose, and you can get involved through Stygian Society, and I'll leave links in the description to both of those as well. And I hope you join us. Thanks so much, OG Rose.
It's complete great. Thank you, Cadell. We're looking forward to it.
Welcome to another philosophical conversation. I'm Cadell Last, and I'm here today with Holly Rhiannon and Pei Vio. Holly Rhiannon is a multifaceted creator whose work spans writing, visual art, and the supernatural. She studied fine arts at the University of Manitoba and became a certified photographer, self-publishing novellas and 2 graphic novels, and also founding and maintaining Drawn and Plastered, an interactive art event blending performance and visual media. She is also the co-founder of the Stygian Society, which we'll be discussing at length in this podcast. Pei Vio is a co-founder of the Stygian Society as well. He is the author of The Peril in Decline, which Pei and I discussed last year on the channel, as well as Searching for Marilyn Monroe. He also recently published in Logic for the Global Brain, a philosophy portal anthology, and was presenting just last night in the Christian Atheism Conference, which was published by Philosophy Portal just yesterday. So welcome to the channel, both of you, and I guess as a sort of preamble for our conversation, both Holly and Pei will be in the portal next month, basically throughout all of May, where we will be building a container to think through philosophy and literature, and I think specifically creating philosophy and literature in the internet age. So with all that as a preamble, Holly, maybe you could open us up and just tell us a little bit about the Stygian Society, what's the Stygian Society about, and then we'll take it from there.
Hi, thank you so much for having both of us. It's great to chat. That was a very good intro. You covered all of my various things. So the Stygian Society, Pei and I launched when we, grew frustrated with the way publishing was going. We didn't really like the way publishers were selecting works. They were very much focused on things like social media presence and not so much just, pure literary talent. So we created this with an art for art's sake doctrine where that's what we're looking at. We're looking at talent when we publish people within the society. So that was the grain of the idea. And it's sort of grown from there as things like AI have become more prevalent. And we're pretty small. We're in our third year now, just as of now. So we're still quite a fledgling business, but we've grown a pretty big community, I feel, with authors who appreciate what we're doing out there.
Fantastic. And Pei, anything you'd want to add to that, as I know you're co-founder of the society as well?
No, as far as what it's about, I think that covered it pretty well. I don't know what else to add to that.
Sure. I mean, I think that like this idea of, focusing on art for art's sake and focusing on talent, I mean, it's so difficult right now to sort of cultivate from that standpoint in our current, let's say, technological environment, mentioning AI. What are some of the biggest challenges that you think you're, facing specifically in the context of artificial intelligence? How has that sort of either disrupted things or created like a glitch or disruption in the model that you started with?
Well, we now have to check to see if people are using AI in their writing, which is definitely something new. Because I mean, when we first started this, I feel like AI got really huge last year about then, right? Like it's always been a thing. Like if you really break down what AI is, Photoshop, for example, has been using it for decades, right? Anything that is this sort of intelligent action that a machine makes is AI, but this generative AI with ChatGPT and everything really exploded in the last year or so. And now we have to implement processes. If someone sends a book, even if they send an email, when we get submissions, we're looking at that email and thinking, did you write this email with AI? Because, do you really want to be platforming a writer who is already just using that in their day-to-day communication?
I mean, it's kind of cringy, but I see so many people now even using ChatGPT to write like Substack articles or like having conversations with ChatGPT and like passing it off as like authentic work. It's kind of like I feel like ChatGPT is like being treated like a big other, like it's being treated like or like even people are coming and giving presentations and like giving me a chat GPT summary of Hegel or something like that. And it's
Well,
like, yeah, I don't know. It makes me pull my hair out.
Well, one thing I learned, I was looking up some more solid statistics on this because a lot of the time you get sort of a vague concept as someone who's in the field, but I was looking up the stats, and 10 out of the top 100 Substack newsletters right now are using AI generated content, with like 7 that rely heavily on AI tools. So it's rising up there. But your mention of the big other pay, I think that was something that we addressed when we were speaking about this before in the notes that we had.
Yeah, well, I, oh boy, there's a lot said there that I was
I know.
gonna say, and then it's just like jump to this topic. Yeah, there's the you talk. Oh, you mentioned something a minute ago. Oh, yeah. No, Cadell, you said mentioned there's like 50 things that was just said, and I'm trying to
That's been my
It's
problem
all
with
narrow
this
good.
that
topic
down
in
into the
general. Like
one.
when we talked, our notes and our transcript wound up being just like,
Like I was gonna mention something
It was
on
like
you
people
mentioned.
writing with ChatGPT or like generating a presentation through ChatGPT.
Yeah. Oh,
or the
that
Hegel
generated.
window.
Yeah, the generate this. I didn't realize that people were doing this until
Huh.
until there were a few. I would watch, say, a few like people are doing making writing scripts for like YouTube videos, and I came across this whole a field of channels that were just like AI philosophy, this and and they make it known that's what it is. But the, the problem with that is that but people that aren't uh, uh, saying that's what it is are still using that, so they're
Yeah.
essentially saying the same thing. And the thing is it's just acts as a feedback loop. Uh, if if there's one thing that is simply just off on, say, some concept that more frequently you use Hegel as an example, this is going to spread so rapidly, and then they all use the same thing. And then that just becomes what is known about the text.
And
And like the other day I
ChatGPT
was
is
showing
notorious for having issues too. So
Well, the other day I was showing you, well, Google has started giving these AI responses just for anything you click in. And when I was looking up images for the presentation that I did yesterday, I can't remember exactly what I put in, but it was something on Sartre. And it gave me a description of being in nothingness. And it's this not like little few sentences on like a little synopsis on being nothingness, which just pretty much stated that this was a text that Sartre had written as an argument against the existence of God, and that's all. And as the well, that's not and then people that will take that away and just run with it, and then now that's just apparently what this text is going to be about now. And it's and yeah, it's not meant to give you accurate answers for things that aren't anything. It's meant to give you the consensus on everything, what that might find this kind of Frankenstein kind of response to something of just anyone's random opinion that's been put out on the internet.
You know, in the academic context, it sounds like AI is kind of replacing the kind of academic work that would find itself in these sort of cheap representations of like like a textbook on a famous philosopher, like a textbook on Sartre or a textbook on Hegel. And in some sense, in that way, ChatGPT is in some way revealing kind of the algorithmic or the artificial nature of a lot of academic writing. And so that's in many ways an interesting way to analyze the way in which our institutions can kill or deaden, say, philosophical thought. But I'd be interested to know, like, in the context of fiction and in the context of your work, how does how does AI how do you detect AI in fiction writing, or how is it specifically affecting the fiction industry?
Well, we detect with a few different tools. There's Zero GPT, there's a variety of them. The problem with these tools is they're not always accurate either, right? So you have to use maybe five of them plus just your own your own intuition. And AI has this, uncanny valley thing to it where people can generally tell, like, there's something off. And also, I'm in a bit of a unique position because in my day job, I do copywriting for a marketing company that heavily uses AI. So I'm constantly sort of learning about it, and I'm in this push and pull with it for productivity, using it as a tool in some ways. And also, telling my CEO when, okay, we're not going to do this. This goes too far. This is theft. This isn't ethical, that sort of thing. So I have a very good sense of what AI is. So I use myself as one of the tools because I come in contact with it so often. I use it. I'm speaking to it all the time. Like I use it, all day, every day when I'm at work for various things. So we use, a combination of that. We'll run it through a few different processes. We'll also run it through like a plagiarism checker, and then I will view it myself and make a determination based on that in the end.
So your intuition is primed to this now.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. It drives me insane. I'll get
Yeah.
cold emails from people sometimes about,
Uh-huh.
do you need this service? Because, the second you have a website on the world out in the world, Stygian will get emails like, we can make you rank higher, and I can tell when it's all
Yeah.
AI. And I usually respond to them and I'll
Do
say, so it's
you?
really obvious that you're using AI to send this letter. How about you hire me, an actual writer, to do your services? And they never write back again after that, but
No, no, I get a lot of those automated emails as well, but I never respond to them. I always see it as such a disappointing a disappointing aspect of our work because, deep down you are always kind of hoping that there's an actual human out there who might be inspired or reading your work or inspired by the stuff you're doing, and then to get this flooded with these automated messages, it's kind of disheartening. So I mean, hats
Mhm.
off to you for at least responding and calling it out. But yeah, Pay, anything for you in terms of like detecting this uncanny valley zone? Like I feel like that's an important, dimension, like where, it's kind of on that border between is this a human or is this a robot?
Yeah, yeah, I think that there is this intuitive sense that we just have when it is, but with the advances that are happening so quickly, it's like you wonder if it's ever going to get to that point in which that intuitive kind of application just won't be effective anymore. Like they're like, especially like within music, uh,
Mhm.
there's there was a band that I had come across recently that I swore was AI, but it turned out wasn't. And but what's interesting about this too is I
It's
spoke
potentially
to
offensive to this band.
yeah, well,
I
it,
thought
it
you
could
guys
be,
were AI for Christ's sake.
but it could. Well, I actually looked it up, and apparently a lot of people thought that. But what's terrifying
Oh
about
god.
that is it showed me that two things are becoming more and more alike. Uh, um, but I guess what I find what's interesting is that I saw someone say this, and then I kind of tested it myself to see if this was like an actual thing. Now, sure, it's just anecdotal, but he was saying this person that I was saying he was a musician, and he couldn't tell the difference between he was an older guy, and he couldn't tell the difference between this AI country song and this other song, but his younger nephew was able to tell, and he was surprised that he couldn't hear that it was AI. And so I tried the same thing with one of my nephews, and the same thing. Like I couldn't really tell it was AI. So I'm wondering if this intuitive sense on what is AI is going to be more prominent in the younger generations that grew up with it, or if it's going to converge. It could go really either way. And then so, but it seems like it might end up actually being more obvious to a younger generation than the older, at least in within something like music.
That's interesting because yeah, I feel like people who are kind of I guess, you know, chronically online or steeped in this stuff, it's a bit more obvious, right? Because I do see a lot of people who see, you know, AI generated art or something and they're just sharing it. And then for me, I see immediately that it's AI and that's a pretty clear thing, but that could be I could see that as being a generational thing because younger people are online more or, you know, just someone in our age group who is also online more.
It's almost like for me, like the apotheosis or the culmination of a lot of standardization and homogenization. Like I know there's a lot of data on like pop music in the last 30 or 40 years all sounding the same. Or again, like a lot of academic writing, like I remember when I first got into my master's program in anthropology and sort of being given like very standardized, almost robotic sort of formula of how an academic paper should be written, what you can do, what you can't do, and all the creativity was sucked out of it. Like the best example I could think of is like the difference between I was in primatology and like the difference between like the liveliness and the experience of primatological field notes, which are just, you know, you're just writing what you're seeing and just like inspired by your experience, and then the actual scientific paper, which is kind of taking all of that creativity out of it and just going by a basic formula. That there's a way in which AI is kind of, I think, revealing the truth of all these homogenizations, and um, so in that way, maybe the older generation can't tell the difference between a certain music being automated versus AI because we've been, you know, being fed like very standardized robotic music or very like formulaic creative works, maybe within neoliberalism for a long time now. I'm
Yeah,
not sure if there's anything there that you
We
guys
yeah.
want to play.
oh yeah, sorry. Hey, I'm gonna try to keep track of the ideas I just had.
Oh, yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I made a similar comment when we were talking about this the other day, um, that the AI music of say our generation wasn't something that was uh traditionally how we understand today. Oddly, that traditionally how we understand AI is something that is more modern but it there really is no like the top 40. I mean, there is no difference between that and AI. You take someone like Taylor Swift who will just
Exactly.
use the same five chords in every single song. Well,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
this is just her
That's
being
the
the
study I was
AI.
reading.
It's yeah. It's so what really what's the difference here if there's no yeah
It's revealing they were already AI in a sense, and it's just like replaced them, you know, like the fact that it
yeah
can be so easily reproduced.
yeah
Yeah,
it's
it I feel like we've already had things like the algorithm in the world at large before it was boiled down into the online world, right?
Yeah, I mean, if there's any other themes you want to develop from that, but it's kind of like, you know, it's, you know, it makes me think, and I just want to draw the parallels here potentially between what you guys are doing at Stygian and what I'm trying to do at Philosophy Portal, because again, when my experience, you know, I've been through the academic system and so forth, but there's a way in which again it systematically step by step in order to go up the ladder you have to drain yourself of all creativity actually, and there's actually no room for like a heterogeneous expression of singularity. It's again just kind of like a reduced to like a an abstract general that's everyone falls into in order to succeed.
Yeah, well, it makes me think a little bit of Save the Cat in fiction, that formula, which is something that I think is good. I think it's a good starting point, and I think that these formulas can be a good starting point when you're learning, right? Because okay, maybe you want to finish a book and you don't know how to finish the book, so you lay Save the Cat over top of that, and it's going to help you finish that book. But the real creativity or authenticity is going to be when you break out of that and you try to do different things and add your personal creativity and more human creativity. And I mean, that's largely the kind of writing that I'd say I'm looking for these days and trying to accomplish myself.
The professors, sorry, the professors that I would talk to, would say, I'm saving that personal creativity, I'm saving that personal expression for like the end of my career when I get tenure. But before I get tenure, I have to go buy this. So it's like people are saving their create, like they're holding it up until they're in their 60s, ready to retire. And even I've had conversations with some people who are saying, I've got my papers that I write for the university, which are going to help me get tenure, and then I've got my real philosophy on the side. It's like they literally make this split. And so I'm almost trying to point towards, and maybe here with Stygian and Philosophy Portal as examples of alternative outlets, is that like people are really living in this split. And I think that AI is kind of revealing that this is a this game is itself dead. Like there's no point to continue giving yourself to this artificial reproductive machine. It's going to be replaced anyway.
Yeah, I like the idea of giving space for that because my personal theory is okay, you can look at AI and how popular it's getting and how a lot of people, enjoy it. There was a study of like 2,300 people who preferred AI poetry over Byron. So like, you have that coming out in the world. But that being said, and with what you've both spoken to about the cycles and pace sort of AI and humans just doing a feedback loop with each other, I think eventually we're going to hit a point where people really do want that real creativity, that real human experience, the community. And even if they're not 100% there yet, I think places like Stygian, our writing challenge, the Order of the Written Word, and Philosophy Portal are what people are going to be seeking out. And I mean, you just had NaNoWriMo completely destroy itself by being pro AI. So I think that's coming, and I think people are going to want that.
Yeah, well, just for the point I usually and Holly's probably heard me say this before too. It's I usually use the example of the '90s grunge scene, in which and the reasons why that took off the way it did. For the previous decade, you had this kind of uh, scene that was so focused on this kind of inauthentic glam metal and hair metal that ultimately started all sounding the same. It was the same look, same repetition, so that when you had someone like Kurt Cobain come along and insert the human being back into music, something more authentic. People were attaching themselves not to it, not because Kurt Cobain was the greatest songwriter of all time, and he was definitely a good songwriter, especially in that scene. But they were attaching themselves to as something that had been lost and forgotten over the previous decade within this kind of very inauthentic scene in hair metal. And so yeah, what they were really gravitating toward was that relatability of another human being. And so the yeah, I guess there's the kind of hope that Holly was talking about. We just hold on to that maybe that kind of shift will take place in certain areas again when but yeah, I guess that's just the example of where that actually has happened. So
But we are always
Mhm.
going to have a lot of people who like listening to the top 40.
yeah, I mean, we still always have people that'll still listen to, like, even in the early '90s, people still listen to hair metal. It
Yeah.
wasn't it wasn't just it was there's a clear split divide between those two things.
Mm, I mean there's a niche here that we're operating in probably that's, maybe in principle antithetical to pop or popular, but again, the weird thing here is like the pop or popular becoming caught up by the algorithm might open up some new potential. And the idea that I was having when you were mentioning, the context of Cobain and Cobain in rock music is that, Cobain introducing the human element there in that context was actually quite dark. Like, I mean, Cobain is a dark character. Like he's singing about suicide, and he's singing about death, and he's singing about darkness, and introducing that force in a profound and probably for many people disturbing way. And I wonder if there's an interesting connection there for us to explore with Stygian, because you guys are also kind of exploring darker themes, and you guys are also introducing a darker human element to writing. So how does this factor into things? Like, what I'm thinking here is there a tendency for people to cover over these darker things with a more generic abstraction, as opposed to going into the singularity of, one's own inner existential struggle, if I could put it like that?
I'll start, and then I'm sure Pei, you have a lot to say on this too. I think that when you are looking for what you see as like really, really inherently human, a lot of the times that is darker. And we are in a world right now where on social media, a lot of the things that you're seeing is sort of a fantasy life. And that's why, I mean, for me personally, I am more drawn to the darker things. I like going for my walks in the graveyard, like any good goth. And I've always been very in touch with that. And I think that's a sort of strong element of reality and being human. And yeah, when you spend so much time and so I do a couple types of writing. I like doing sort of gothic murder mystery type thing, which is probably the direction I will go in more in the future. But I'm also working on a fantasy novel right now. And in that world of, younger adult, there is a lot of what I would, loosely call inauthenticity in the way that's marketed, in the way that's pushed online, that's very, very frustrating and just makes this stuff seem very light and like the pop music of writing, and that's not the kind of thing that we want to explore too much. And it can be a fun thing. There's a place for that, but there's so much of it out there right now that I think, yeah, you need a home for things that are darker or things that have more of a classic sensibility.
Hmm. Yeah, anything there that's alive for you, Pay, specifically about like the human element and the way in which that's entangled with negativity, darkness, long walks in the graveyard, and so forth.
Yeah, I was just thinking there should be this Venn diagram of where you have Goths in one circle and Heidegger in the other, and they meet in the center to spend more time in graveyards. That would, but um, yeah, no, I think it's this. I mean, I'm under the kind of Sartrean interpretation of human nature being quite painful. So but so and these acts of fantasy in the sense that Holly used it is an act of more or less bad faith in a way, where it's a refusal to take responsibility, and this is very, very common in AI art that will use these things as a refusal to create these things that are not preconceived values in place of kind of ignoring this authentic self to actually it's denying oneself the act of creating in this, and uh in this way would be an act of living in bad faith, even though you'd still say it's an artist which creates AI art might still be able to uh live under that illusion and that act was still done by them themselves, but it's just but there's no subjective experience there. It's a subjective experience built by multiple other experiences that individual never actually took place in. So yeah, it would essentially just these quote unquote AI artists would just be living in bad faith and denying that freedom, that art that is inherent in the act of creating.
The idea that's coming to my mind here is that, you know, if being a human is fundamentally quite painful, that there would be a lot of incentives for people to try to escape or try to exit that experience and try to create a simulation. Like Holly, you're saying a lot of social media is just a fantasy life. And I think most people just, I know many adults who, from my point of view, just look like they're escaping into this fantasy life on social media. And so there's a lot of incentives for people to drift off in this world, and people are getting a lot of tools and getting a lot of opportunity to further develop that escape. So, what is the role of art here in terms of maybe, and the role of the artist that requires a certain courage, or a certain, a courage to live, a courage to experience, and how do you, as it were, find those others, and maybe how does something like the Stygian Society help people build community with other people who are similarly disposed?
Oh, wow. I think that by making statements about what we're doing and about our ethos, and having a strong ethos rather than being a publishing platform that's simply about the algorithm and things like that, like we've been very clear that we have disclaimers on our submissions page of, don't tell us your social media account. Don't tell us things about your identity that don't apply to your writing at all. Like, we are looking at your writing and we're pretty strong in our statements on that. So hopefully we will attract people like that. Obviously, you get people who are just sending submissions out to everyone they can find, and we don't, respond to those people generally. But yeah, providing that platform and providing that space and leading by example, I think, are really important things right now, because you can show that well, I mean, one of the things Pei and I have discussed is that you can't be 100% authentic online, or when someone is watching you. You just can't help but not be, but you can try to be. You can try to express the real elements of your life, and I can show that I can enjoy darker things, and I can be in touch with reality while also being a writer, and not having too bad of a time of it. Like, I would consider myself a fairly positive and driven person, and I'm still very much in touch with the reality of life, and I don't spend my time doom scrolling on Instagram.
We need to create a cultural movement that replaces doom scrolling with graveyard I wanted something that rhyme with scrolling,
Graveyard
strolling.
I was just
Strolling.
gonna
I
say
was
doom
looking for that.
scrolling.
Graveyard strolling.
Perfect.
Doom scrolling.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So yeah, pay any. I mean, the idea of authenticity as well, like, coming up a lot. Like, what does it even mean to be 100% authentic in your view? And maybe how is that connected to art, or does art help oneself find a way to be, as it were, 100% authentic or more authentic?
Well, I mean, authenticity itself. I mean, for me, or I mean, I guess I would again take Sartre's view that it's kind of just this thing situated in one's subjective experience, and relies on embracing the act of creating values that kind of perpetuate this experience apart from predetermined values, and which would then lead one to have no choice but to accept their freedom in the world, I guess, and be who it is that they might claim to be, or or actually are or become that thing. So that's how I would say put the emphasis on subjective experience. That's how I would see authenticity. What was the second part of that question?
No, I mean I think that helps, and especially in the context of what I was reflecting on earlier about people getting a lot of tools now to escape subjective experience and create from that standpoint without subjective experience. It seems like being diametrically opposed to the model that you're inspired by in SART.
Yeah, no, how just getting drunk every night. I would think that would have been enough to, if someone really wants to. We don't need to create whole new worlds. We used to be able to do this perfectly fine, but and still be able to remain the same the next morning, more or less. But as far as I, I I guess yeah, it would just go back to what I was saying earlier in regard to bad faith. It's just it's but it will attract people that people have this kind of romantic view of especially with philosophy, right? You see this on platforms like YouTube all the time where they're not all that interested in actually learning the methodologies and applying them to a particular text. They read these texts as they are reading uh, Harry Potter or something. It's just that and then they put it down and then never go back to it, and then they and it's they they have this weird um yeah, I don't really know another way to put it other than just this romantic view that doesn't actually really exist. Not in the way that they present it, and they just want the image of that, but not the actual content of what might come along with it. And AI and especially with ChatGPT and it gives them that image and not without the content, and then they just put that as like the false front. And yeah, those old houses back in the 50s that had those false fronts, and then you walk in and that's just this little store, and it's just that's what kind of YouTube really is when it comes to a majority of the philosophy there. It's this giant false front, and then you actually listen to it and go, there's nothing actually there.
It's a really good image. And
But
what's
it's
coming to
good.
my mind is, and we've talked a lot about this off recording pay about, the quality of YouTube philosophy, YouTube say, and wonder if you would make the same parallel, Holly, with, I'm not sure if there's a community, a YouTube community related to fiction or literature, but do you see the same thing that Pay's describing on the philosophy side?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And this is another thing that Pei and I have communicated about quite a bit. And see, I've been, I guess, lucky to not be fully in this, but Pei was in, BookTube quite heavily for a while when he first started on YouTube. And very inauthentic experience a lot of the time. I mean, I'm not saying this about everybody. Like our first publication was author tubers. Everyone in the Stygian collection was posting on YouTube, and there are some amazing people out there. But just like with philosophy, there's a lot of that on YouTube that's very much about the vision, this concept of like, look, I'm a cool author and reader who's read like 100 books this year, and like it gives you this image, but then you see certain things about this person that are not that at all, and it's all just a total facade, and they've decided that this is how they want to appear, and it's not really what they're doing at all, and they're not absorbing anything in the stuff that they're reading. It's kind of like rampant content creation, right? Where you're just trying to put this stuff out over and over and over again, and you will see these people adopt AI for, for their thumbnails, their scripts, their descriptions and stuff, because all along they were very much about just pumping this stuff out and appearing in a particular way. And I think that's probably across every genre on YouTube.
So how do we, I mean, what are your methods? Maybe that's a good question for you, Pei. Like, what are your methods? Because I know we've also talked about like sifting through this rampant content creation and like actually identifying like there is an opportunity here, like there is an opportunity to find people who are actually doing the work and not just sort of engaging the game of content creation. But what are your like, I guess, modes of detection? You know, Holly was saying her intuition's tuned to this now. What are your modes of detection for like when there's something behind the facade, so to speak?
Typically, if they have the word skeptic in their name, I stay away. And it's, I don't know why there's a million channels with that and that, but they're usually terrible. Uh, um, but no, there's no real method, or it is more just intuitive. I mean, I've been I mean, with what Holly is saying, like my channel that I had was actually a really good example of it in authenticity, because and it wasn't purposeful, and but I think there's this and it didn't originally start that way. It's more when I got into a specific kind of group,
Niche.
like BookTube, and this isn't anything against BookTube. Like a lot of the people I met on BookTube, they were great people, and but I started to position myself to be more like that. Those channels, like, but my like when I started, when I first started YouTube, like a good example, it would be my videos always had like sentences and they were all just cut. And the reason for that is because when I started, I had a bad nervous stutter for some reason. And I just kept that hidden. No one like I would, so I would just cut the sentences and glue them all together is where I would do that. But then when they started doing these tag videos, you had to do them like on the spot. And so then it came out then, and then it was just like a different person. So you could see these two, and as I'd go back and see my videos, I'd be like, my personality and everything changes according to what it is that I'm doing, and I wouldn't notice while I was doing it, and then until I would look back and I'd see that, and so I don't think it's something that is necessarily in one for a lot of people it's not in their capability to really control.
I think it's a good cautionary tale, and it's one that like I take to heart because I mean I've been basically releasing. I don't like the word content creator, but like I've been releasing content in the philosophy genre for since like 2017 or 2018 pretty regularly, and it's like this constant battle with you've got to pay attention to certain trends, you've got to pay attention to certain things that the algorithm's picking up, but at the same time you don't want it to, as it were, really cut into what you want to do or what you want to say, and you're walking this really weird line, and you got to be careful not to lose yourself in the process, but it's quite a strange balancing act. And it's I guess it's just that constant struggle, but it's at the same time something that you can really lose yourself in. So I don't know what you guys think about the notion of content creator, but it's kind of like this idea that's kind of overtaken traditional words like artist or philosopher. Everyone's a content creator now. How do we sort of walk that line?
But real quick, just before that, just to go back to your previous question, actually, just because you brought this up, on one way I find that if you're on a platform like YouTube and you want to know what if this is one of those people that are putting up that facade or something, is to see what they're doing offline, because a lot of the people that I'll
Yeah,
watch on YouTube, I don't consider YouTubers. Like I don't consider you or what
yeah,
philosophy
yeah, yeah,
portal. Though you put this out,
yeah.
like your focus, like
I think
YouTube
that's right.
is more I don't want to say advertisement to direct people to what you're doing
That's
It's
how I
online,
see it.
support.
but yeah,
It's
it's kind of,
support.
yeah. And so
Yep.
if they have something like that, like even what Theory Underground's doing, right? Like I
Yep.
wouldn't consider that really a YouTube channel as much as it is like the primary work there is off of that. So I think that that's if they have nothing outside of it, then
Yep.
skepticism may settle in. But yeah, so that was just
I
to
think
go
that's
back to
really
your
good. I think that's
previous.
really good. Like because like my story is I went onto YouTube because I was creating something in the institutions that couldn't be held in the institutions. So there was a real context there. And then I also detected that if I just stayed on YouTube, it would quickly become superficial, that there had to be something built behind the scene, so to speak, something built behind the screen, so to speak, that gave it depth and something real. So that is how I see it, is that basically YouTube is just a surface that is meant to draw the right type of person behind the screen, so to speak, into context where the real work is, so to speak, happening. And I think the conference weekend that you just participated in is an example of that, like where that couldn't have happened if it was just a YouTube channel, so to speak.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if
yeah.
there's anything there, Holly, that you
And
want to. Oh, hey, go ahead.
sorry, and there's just one final point on that. You can tell, like especially with the conference that just wrapped up, you can tell everyone that was involved in that uh, if they discovered you through something like YouTube, you're attracting the right people, right? Like everyone that presented and everyone that had something to say in that discussion, you didn't get the same sense from any of them that you would get from the quote unquote YouTube philosophers and whatnot. So it it can be done right
Yes,
and I think what you're doing, what OG Rose is doing, what Theory Underground is doing are great examples of how that can be used.
I think we're
Yeah.
pioneering a model here. We're experimenting with something, and I think if we keep on fumbling around in our failures and our tensions and our frustrations, that we will be able to cultivate a network of people who are using the algorithm against the algorithm in a certain way. That's kind of what I'm thinking, which is injecting the human and the disruption into the smooth, frictionless, accumulation of data and information, basically.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that anyone here is a content creator, because for me, I would say content creator aligns heavily with algorithms and things like clickbait. And I think to be a content creator, you have to be coming at it from a place where all you're trying to do is create content. And like you were just saying, I don't think what we're trying to do is create content. And anytime that I have gone into that in my channel, like there was maybe a year where I posted really regularly, but it was because I was just sort of going, okay, what's a popular topic that I can talk about? And it's very hard when you say fumbling around, it's very hard to find the line that you want to ride with that. And I think it really mostly focuses on where you're coming from. So anytime I make a video or a post and I can tell that it wasn't, for sort of my greater being or something I truly believe in creatively, I don't feel great about it and I usually end up sort of like moving on from that or deleting it or something. So if you don't want to come off as a content creator, I think it really is about actually thinking about everything that you post online. Like you have to go, why am I posting this? You have to be aware. You can't just post with wild abandon. And I think that people who are in that content sphere, who are, YouTubers, they're heavily looking at trends and the algorithm and getting stuff out as often as possible versus what you're actually putting out into the world.
Absolutely. I just want to say, I think we're like zeroing in on an important distinction that I've been trying to develop in building Philosophy Portal between the virtual and the physical, where where if it's just purely virtual, you can find yourself in this frictionless surface. But if you connect the virtual to either the physical or to some real project, which is inviting people into the possibility of either a real creation or a real relationship or a real community, that this is kind of the sweet spot that we're trying to, again, fumble around and build a model to to connect with other people doing that as well. And the idea, or like the sort of the reflection I wanted to share was, I remember watching this video from, I don't know if you guys have heard of BreadTube, but it's like basically like a left-wing YouTube. And this video had a funnel, so they called it a BreadTube funnel, of like all the content creators on LeftTube. And I was looking at the funnel from like the top would be like the pop videos, and then down the funnel you would find like the people basically doing like a university style lecture work. But if you analyze the whole funnel, I thought the one thing that they all had in common was that there was nothing behind the surface of any of the projects. In other words, nothing was connecting the YouTube channels to any like real coursework or university work or community organizing or anything like that. So I think that this is really where we short circuit the algorithm, and maybe that's something that we might want to develop further in the portal this month, because obviously this conversation is just sort of a preface to the work that we're going to be doing in the portal. I'm not sure if you guys have any ideas about that, or any ideas that you would want to share there pointing towards our work in the portal, but yeah, maybe point in that direction.
No, I'm trying to envision I'm not familiar with what did you say,
Like left-wing YouTube.
Left-wing YouTube?
It's like when I'm talking about like the more popular stuff, we're talking about like ContraPoints and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that is.
Who I love, who I love. But
I'll have to counterpoints.
ContraPoints.
ContraPoints. I'll have to look that up. Yeah, no, I don't know if I'm understanding the idea.
I guess what I'm saying is, like with your metaphor of the facade of the house, right, where there's nothing behind the house, I'm saying the entire funnel was just the facade. Like no matter how pop or no matter how deep the funnel went, like there was still just the screen there. Like there was not, like when you were bringing up the projects like ours or OG Rose or Theory Underground, what kind of links all of those projects together is that there is actually something behind that's being cultivated, which isn't just the algorithm. And I wanted to connect that to our session in the portal that you guys will be leading, which is art, authenticity, and the algorithm. That kind of, if we bring all those themes together of art, authenticity, and the algorithm, I think what we're pointing towards is that there's some connection to real life, and there's some acceptance of the human negativity of experience that we're trying to work with. Like we're not trying to escape it in a deep sense.
Yeah, I mean, well, some of our best stuff has been when we are able to take it offline. I think that is something really important to sort of discuss, or into a more private spot. Like we have YouTube, we have publishing and all of that, but we also have our Discord server, which has arguably been one of our more successful things to build community and build discussion. And I think we have just over like 420 people in there now who are all very much on board with our whole ethos and stuff like that. And I think that is really important to not just have that shell, right? Yeah, because some of our most successful things that we've done through Stygian have been, away from that facade, and it has very much been a thing that just brings people into the deeper stuff that we're trying to do. And I think it is important to address that and get into it more and figure out even more ways that you can do that sort of thing with the output that you're doing online. Because we've had the Stygian Caravan, which was an event we were doing within Montreal. We had people come into that through YouTube and through Facebook, things like that. And our Discord server has been one of our most successful things for sure. And I mean, that's not in meat space, but it is in a more like intimate environment, I guess. We have like over 420 people now, and they all are very much in agreement with that ethos. They're all very against AI. They're all very into, being as authentic as they can be in their work. And it's been really cool to see that community flourish. And that's sort of the goal that we would like to continue with our ventures.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, and at the same time, like, I don't think we need to create a pure antagonism between, what you're saying, virtual space and meet space, but some behind the scenes where real relations, real community can be cultivated in a certain sense. So I'll be excited to go into that with you guys in the portal, which is itself, like a cultivated virtual community that does sort of strive towards physical meetups. But yeah, of course, we're in an age that's primarily virtual. So maybe pointing towards that, what are you guys hoping to develop for your event, Art, Authenticity, and the Algorithm? And then maybe we'll just point towards, you guys being in the portal for the month.
Well, let's see. We have quite a few topics that we want to get into. I think one of the things that we want to start off with in May is really defining authenticity, and that's something that we got into quite a bit. And then just sort of go out from there with, creating while being watched, the algorithm as a mirror, how people interact with the algorithm and what it feeds back to you. How AI is kind of the final boss of inauthenticity, if you will. Sort of art as a symbol, capitalism and theft and ethics in AI creation, as well as this sort of hedonism that the internet can sometimes create. So it's quite a bit.
I love this idea of AI as the final boss of inauthenticity. I think that's exactly in line with what I was trying to point towards with AI kind of its realization pointing towards just the fact that it can outcompete university writing is kind of, or pop music is proof that these were all inauthentic forms to begin with, so there is an opportunity there as well. So yeah, Pei, I mean, same question to you. What are some of the themes that you're hoping to explore this month in the portal with us?
Yeah, kind of, well, the theme would be very much what was just stated there. I think where we will take different approaches. I think where Ollie will probably discuss more the through the lens of an artist, where I'll probably tackle the philosophical elements that are attached to them, but roughly around, but focused on the same themes. Without getting too much or without getting into the topics now, but especially with this idea of kind of being watched and from more than one aspect, and how that plays into how one might come across online to the other. So this is a very different subject than what people might believe themselves to be doing, or to be presenting, I should say. And yeah,
Getting into some psychological exhibitionism.
yeah, it's well, there is so much in all of this that what I really got to do is just narrow in on a couple main ideas and not just go all over the place. Grenade of ideas just go off, and gotta pick up the pieces and put them all together. But
All right. Well, the month in the portal is going to be called The Art of Storytelling. I'm going to be opening it up with a preview of my next book, Real Speculations. We're going to have, both of you in to focus on art, authenticity, and the algorithm. We'll have OG Rose in as well, who will be leading a session on their latest fiction book, Under the Wing. So there is a theme here, that I would like to explore between philosophy and literature. I know we've talked before, Pei, about good philosophy needing to be translated into a literary form, and also literature containing deep philosophy. And this relationship between the two is something that I would love to go into in the month with you guys. And yeah, I mean, all links will be in the description to that if you're interested in getting involved with us. And maybe as a signing off, just pointing towards any work that you'd like to point the viewers towards, either related to Stygian Society or some of your other work, and I'll link it in the description.
Well, you can find the Stygian Society everywhere, stygiansociety.com. We are on probably way too much social media right now. We are working on honing that at the moment, but you can find us all over the place, just Stygian. I personally am, on Instagram, Facebook, all those places under Stygian Pen, and I have my own site, hollyrhiannon.com. I'm working on launching my next book, which is a fantasy novel, so there's going to be some interesting fantasy promo all over my pages in the months ahead. But that's pretty much where I am and what I'm doing at the moment.
Anything from you, Pei? Basically, other than Stygian Society, pointing towards your books as well.
Yeah, I don't have anything now, but I've been working on a few projects that will all start being released at the end of the year. So if I've been heavily offline recently, that's all about to change. And I'll be
Ooh,
back
exciting.
with a bunch of work. So hopefully, though I don't have anything at this moment, I definitely will by the end of the year for sure.
I'm liking the teaser and looking forward to the future work. Looking forward to your fantasy novel, Holly, as well as whatever you produce. And again, I want to just sort of say publicly what a great presentation you did yesterday at the Rosie Cross 2 conference, and would point people
Thank you.
towards that as well if they're interested in diving into what you're currently thinking through philosophically. But yeah, that's it for me. We'll be in the portal throughout all of May with the Stygian Society as well as OG Rose. There'll be links in the description if you want to get involved, and I hope to see you there. The next Philosophy Portal course will focus on the works of early Marx. The course starts June 9th. To learn more or to sign up, check the link below or visit philosophyportal.online.